Good evening. My name's Tony Chooks, and I'm really excited to talk about today's podcast. We're going to be talking about the I Have a Dream speech. And I'm excited about that because it's something that we always pull out for Black History Month. We always make sure that we talk about it, but we never talk about the other narratives that were mentioned. We often refer to the 16-minute speech given by Martin Luther King on August 28th, 1963, as the I Have a Dream speech. The first time the word dream was used was in minute 11. The phrase I have a dream was used 9 times, and the word dream was used 10 times. These statistics indicate that King was probably speaking extemporaneously at this time. If King was asked to name the speech, what would he have named it? We will never know. But what we can do is explore the other narratives in the speech and ask why are they rarely considered. Some of the other narratives include insufficient funds, never satisfied, police brutality, no economic relief, whites only, voting. 5 score was a direct hit at the 100 years from the time that Abraham Lincoln delivered his 4 score and 7 years when he was referring to the inception of our country. But what Martin Luther King was referring to was 100 years from the Emancipation Proclamation. So he's saying, hey, from 1863 to 1963, what has really happened for Black people? Where's all this progress? Where's all this great stuff that's supposed to have happened to us? And so he's telling you, here's my summation of what has happened in 100 years. Still not free. 100 years later, exiled in our own land, promissory notes, Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, defaulting on a promise, bad check, insufficient funds. He says, tranquilizing drug of gradualism. In other words, take your time. This takes time. Come on, Black people, you got to be patient. Well, how patient do we need to be? Because this is 5 score, 100 years from the Emancipation Proclamation, which was supposedly written to free the slaves. And here we are. Bad check. Well, I'm sorry. I already read that. Admonishment. Then he admonishes the people. He says he admonished them not to drink from bitterness, the cup of bitterness. He says Black people should remain nonviolent. He says, don't mistrust all whites. Now, you better believe they make sure and put that in the speech. If they're only going to do a 30-second hit of the speech, that usually finds its way in there because those are controlling phrases. And that's why people liked Martin Luther King when you had to juxtapose him to Malcolm X, because people thought of Malcolm X as a militant, as somebody that wanted to fight, and of course, here's Martin Luther King saying, no, we're going to be nonviolent. We're not going to fight back. We're going to love white people. Oh, man, if I had to go and fight against a group, I'd love for that group to say they love me and they won't fight against me and I can hit them, but they won't hit me back. I would love that. And that's what Martin Luther King preached. And so that's why there were many people that, and that's why in Black History Month, you hear about Martin Luther King, but you rarely hear about Malcolm X. Let me put it that way. You rarely hear about him. Or you don't hear about Marcus Garvey, who was way before Malcolm X, 60 years before Malcolm X. You don't hear about him. And so it's important to understand these things when we look at history of why some certain people get elevated and why some people don't. These other narratives are rarely explored. It's easier for white America to believe that we solved all of our problems in the 60s and we probably made things fair for everyone. Many of my white friends will start their conversation on race with me with the question, don't you think things have improved for Blacks in this country? Let me tell you what my honest, frank answer is. Hell no. And if you ask me that question, that's exactly what I'm going to say. Hell no. Not just no, hell no. And then I have a list of reasons why, and we'll hit some of those in a minute. But you know, when you look at things, you have to say their reference point is usually the civil rights movement. I tend to believe that the civil rights movement started in 1865 and not 1955. But wherever we start, a better question would be to ask me, do you think there have been improvements for Black people in this country? Let me let you in on a secret, my white brothers. Black progress is not your call. You don't get to tell me that I progress. Let me ask you some questions. Is it progress that we wrote a document that says all men are created equal while endorsing chattel slavery and Blacks counting as 3/5 of a human being? Is it progress that during Reconstruction, Blacks did not receive 40 acres or a mule? Is it progress that Judge Taney said no Black has any right that a white man is bound to respect? This was in 1857, before the starting of the Civil War. Is it progress that 3 years before the end of the Civil War, that tens of millions of acres were given away for free to white settlers who were willing to work the land and make it their own? I think you had to do it for 3 years, and then you own the land. And they started with like 50-acre plots. They gave away 50 acres. And to some people got 500-acre plots. 500 acres of land free. And we were given nothing. Is it progress that legalized segregation was the law of the land for 60 years? That's Plessy versus Ferguson from 1896 to 1956, when that was done in. Is it progress that after fighting in World War I, Black soldiers came back to America and faced lynch mobs from the KKK? Is it progress after fighting in every war in this country that this country has had, we still have to fight? We still cannot fight with white soldiers in World War II. Is it progress that Brown versus Board of Education, that said all deliberate speed, which really meant take your sweet time? Is it progress that Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all were assassinated in a 5-year period, effectively ending the civil rights movement? Is it progress that Henry Aaron faced hundreds of letters of hate mail, and when he was on the eve of breaking Babe Ruth's record in 1974, and we saw the same thing happen to Barack Obama in 2008 when he ran for president, and you looked in magazines and you looked online and you saw bananas and monkeys and all kinds of racially explicit stereotypes to show that many whites did not think that he should be president. Okay, so I know these are rhetorical questions, but I think you know the answer. No, guys, I'm not going to accept some tokenism and some symbolic changes as progress. I'm not going to do that. On the eve of the Civil War in 1860, we had about 5 million Black people in this country, most of whom were slaves. About 250,000 of those 5 million were free people. And with that 250,000, we accumulated 0.5% of the wealth of this country. Now we fast forward 160 years. Black people own about 1% of the wealth of this country. What? And you're telling me progress? We've doubled the amount of wealth we own. But remember, we are almost 13% of the population of this country, and we own 1% of the wealth? One? We did a lot of the groundwork here. Like I said, we didn't get our 40 acres and a mule. We didn't get that land that many people were able to get and use it to educate their children and build up a nest egg and have something to hand down to their families. We handed down pretty much nothing because we didn't have anything. Okay, so I think we have to look at those things, and I think we have to see those things for what they are. And I hope when you look at these things and you see these things that you realize that Martin Luther King, he did have a dream. But guys, we got to look at this real. These other narratives that were put out there are real, and we just don't talk about them. What if we would have named that speech insufficient funds? Boy, don't you think that would have changed the narrative? Because he said that in the speech. But we like to pick out the phrase that sounds good for us to make it look like we fixed everything during that time period. And we didn't. In fact, Martin Luther King was quoted, that speech was given in 1963. In 1967, 1 year before he died, he came out and said, I think that I Have a Dream speech is turning into a nightmare. That's what he said. And of course, Martin Luther King's attitude was, we need to integrate. And even that, he said, I think that might have been the wrong plan. What we probably should have done was aggregate, because we still had the remnants of some communities back then. What if the federal government would have said, here, Black people, let's put a bunch of money into your communities and make them better, so you don't have to depend on us for a job. You don't have to depend on the government for a job, or you don't have to go beg somebody for a job. We'll give you a community, and we'll give you some resources that we never gave you when we gave them to everybody else. And understand this, guys. America has the greatest affirmative action program that I know in the history of the world. But guess what? It was for white people. You could come here and get free land and free labor. Can you beat that? Free land and free labor? Tell me, how do you not get rich with that? I'm going to give you land. All you got to do is work it, and you can get free labor. How do you not make it rich? How do you not make it with that kind of situation? But we're only going to give that to people who are white. We're not giving it to everybody. And we definitely aren't giving it to Black people. That's why we didn't get the 40 acres and a mule. Because after slavery ended, slaves were the greatest asset of this country. But once slavery ended, now the asset became the land that the slave worked. That became the asset. That became the thing that was important. And so they were not about to give us the one thing left that was important, which was land. And guys, I get so, and I know I'm going a little bit on a diatribe here, but I really get upset when I hear people say, white or Black, when I hear them say, well, they freed the slaves in 1865. Why are they still complaining? That was over 150 years ago. Freed the slaves? What kind? Wait a minute. You weren't educated. You couldn't read and write. It was against the law for you to read and write. You had no land. You had no money. You had no wealth. You had no place to live. And you tell me that's free? You're telling me in this great country of opportunity where we give billions of dollars to people who come here, that sign out there in Ellis Island that says, bring me your sick and you're poor and you're hungry, as long as they're not Black. Come on, guys. We got to be fair about this thing. If I never get a penny of reparations or anything from the government, I can live with that. But you know what I do want out there? The truth. I don't want to hear some white person telling me we have to protect our country by not telling the bad news about it. We can only tell the good parts of it. What? Oh, okay. So why don't we start going to the doctor and you've got cancer, so we just won't tell you because that's bad news. So we just won't tell you, and you just sit there and die one of those painful, agonizing deaths of all time because we don't want to give you any bad news. Stop it. That doesn't make any sense, guys. Stop it. If we're a great country, as we say we are, we will face up to the mistakes we've made in this country, and then we will make things better. But to act like they didn't exist and then to vilify the people with whom they were put upon, that's wrong, and we need to change it. I hope you learned something from this time of Martin Luther King and him having a dream. Thank you very much. See you next time.